Welcome to Discover Northern Kentucky. In this two-part program, we will learn about the history, renaissance, and future of the Mainstrasse district in Covington.
Covington is well known for its German heritage. I believe perhaps roughly almost half of the population of Covington is of German descent, and Kenton County is probably about the same percentage. So we're really in the heartland here, one of the great German heritage centers in the greater Cincinnati area. And the other two major centers are in Milwaukee and St. Louis. German immigrants started coming to this area right after the American Revolution. There were a number of veterans of the American Revolution, Germans who had fought in the Revolution, and of course they were very much strongly in favor of that. The U.S. government was basically bankrupt, and the big question was, how do they provide for all of these veterans of the Revolution? Well, they were provided with land grants on both sides of the Ohio River. And if you look at the early tax records, you can get a list of all of these soldiers who came to the area and did get land grants in Newport, Covington, also in Cincinnati. And also, after the Revolution, of course, Fort Washington was established on the Cincinnati side of the river. Well, who was the regiment there? It was a Pennsylvania German regiment. They had fought in the Revolution, and after they had served their time at Fort Washington, many of these soldiers just settled down in this area, and then they wrote home and got many to come here also. For Germans, they were especially attracted to the beautiful river valley. It reminded them of the Rhineland. This was even called the American Rhineland, and many authors started writing about it and how picturesque and beautiful it was. They started planting vineyards along the river, and it started just attracting many people. And once it attracted people, they would write home to friends and family and attract others to come here. And so by the 1830s, the immigration was well underway. And it's not too surprising that people, right up to this very day, you see people still coming to this area who had friends and family going back generations. So it's still an ongoing process. It never stops or ends. So it's important to think about the German immigration as not only something in the past, but it really goes up right to the very present. Well, there are a lot of interesting organizations that were founded by the German Americans, but on the south end of the village is located the Covington Turners. The Turners are one of the oldest German societies in the area, and they have a Turner Hall there. The Turners came here after the 1848 Revolution in Germany, and they were also involved in the American Civil War. There were German regiments that were formed in this area. There were German-speaking regiments. Also on the south end, you see the old Bavarian brewery that goes back to the 1860s. So there's some historic buildings and structures around here that remind us of the past. There are also a number of the German street names here that remind us of the German heritage. I think maybe it's the homes and the general street and cityscape that what's important here, because it represents what an old German neighborhood was like in the 19th and early 20th century, and it's very valuable to have preserved that because it gives you a sample of the life here in the community by the people who built and made Covington.
That building right at the corner over there, the Lawrence Law Firm, that was a park hotel, and it got deteriorated. And about 2 or 3 years ago, Dick Lawrence bought that building, put over $2 million in investment into it, and now it's one of the most prominent buildings in the city of Covington because of the architecture and what it stands for. It's just a prominent area of Mainstrasse.
Well, the building that we're in has a unique history. It was originally built by an architect as a wedding present for his daughter and his new son-in-law. And they, I believe, lived in the house for a number of years. It then became, I think throughout the years, a nursing home facility, I've been told by some of the people in the local community. It has also been a hotel and a private residence. Most people know the building as the old Park Hotel. And so it's been many things, and now it is our law offices primary location. We had lunch one day in Mainstrasse, and we were driving by the building, and there was a for sale sign in the door. And my father said, "I've always wanted to see the inside of that building. I think we should go up there and we should go by that building." And we all kind of laughed. And he had always loved the building and had, been down in the area many times. And we just thought it was beautiful and thought it had a lot of restoration potential, and just absolutely fell in love with the building once we saw it. Sure enough, we talked our way in, and the owner was very gracious, and we actually purchased the building the same day that we saw it, and wrote out initially the agreement on a napkin, and came back and did everything formally. But we wanted to be in Covington because we thought that this was a great place for our office and a great location for our clients. We have been here for approximately the last 3 years. We have owned it for a little bit longer than that, and undertook the bidding process and hired a local architect who had a background in historic preservation. And one of our key goals and main goals when we restored the property was to maintain the historical integrity of the building. The contractors who worked on the building, the architect, and all of the subcontractors, everyone who worked on this project, I feel like really gave it 110%. More importantly, I feel like their heart and soul was really poured into the renovation. And we really tried to maintain the historical integrity and preserve as much of it as we truly could. My heart and soul is truly within this community, and it is absolutely within this building. I oversaw the renovation of the project, and we wanted to make sure that it was done right and that we really restored it to the beauty that it truly had when it was originally built by that architect for his daughter. We have heard stories. In fact, one of the nieces of the family who owned the building for the last 40-some years before we purchased it knocked on the door one day and asked if she could come in and see what we had done. And when she came into the building, she absolutely loved the renovations, and she told us a story about how when she was a little girl, she would come to the building and she would play, and when she and her other cousins and her siblings would be playing in the basement, that there was a ghost, and they would call the ghost Hazel. Well, she told this story to one of our employees who had spent a lot of time down in the basement, and he said, "I didn't really know that there was a ghost named Hazel because I started seeing things happening and I just happened to call the person Hazel." So we might have a ghost. She's a friendly ghost, but that's one of the stories. And just have heard some wonderful things about the family who used to live here before we purchased the building.
Well, we've been here for 25 years. In the wintertime we started. And we have all nationalities, mostly European. That was the whole crux of the thing, is that we wanted a European store to represent the German people that settled this region. My parents were both born in Germany, so people wonder, well, why? Yeah, that's it. I grew up with it. I have a love for the folk art, the heritage, the history.
Yeah.
And when I was a little girl, it wasn't real popular to be German, so
Really?
because of the war. Yeah, so I remember those days. But and now we are proud to say we're German Americans, and our parents came here for a better life, and now here we are.
I was born right here in Mainstrasse area on 7th Street. Our house backed up at Oval Park. My grandfather and my father and aunt and other uncles grew up on Main Street here, right between 6th and 7th. Their house now is being used for the Bean House, I believe. When I was a small child, the first memory I have, my father was in the service, and I used to sneak over the hill and go down into the little hollow where the expressway is now, and take a salt shaker from the house and sit there in the gardens, the Victory Gardens down there, and eat vegetables. Other than that, I just remember when the fellows were coming home from the service, they would lay in the park, read their newspaper, give you the pennies out of their cigarette packs, things along that line. Of course, when I was living here, it was a pretty vibrant neighborhood. Up where D. Felisa is now, that was the drugstore. Our parents used to walk us down for ice cream, soda, or ice cream cone, whatever. There was a lot of interactivity among the neighbors, and they still had the vegetables for sale along the street here on 6th Street on certain days of the week. I wouldn't remember what days those were.
I moved further out in the country when my mother married my father, and she married into a family that came down here to set up and sell their vegetables and their produce and their other things that they raised on the farm. So I've always kind of been tied to this area. Yeah. Well, my mother's family came from Main Street here, and they were all raised within this area, and back when it was a vibrant little community. There was there were bakeries, there were grocery stores, there was a drugstore, there was a theater, there was just about everything you wanted right here, and it was a great community. There's several churches within walking distance, a nice German neighborhood. Yeah, a lot of the European traits were carried out, a lot of cleaning right in front of your stores, cleaning the stoop and the sidewalk out in front. So
I can take you next Monday night before the trash man comes on Tuesday, and there will be some of these second generation German people out sweeping the sidewalks and the street. Residents out sweeping the streets. So it kind of stays.
All you have to do is look at the architecture in the side streets, and you will see what looks like a corner store on almost every corner. And when we first bought here, I spent a lot of time in the library trying to do some research. One of the more interesting things I found out was about our home, and our home was the home of a doctor who practiced in our home for probably 60 years. He and his son practiced together. And on the back alley and back of our house, there used to be a tailor's shop. And in the 1860s and 1870s, when our house was first built, there were a lot of milliners living on our street because the city directories say where people lived and what they did. So I am assuming that a number of those milliners worked in their home on consignment making hats for women, and there were tailors living on our streets too. I'm sure that they must have worked in that tailor shop. We still have old German neighbors, people who have been here forever. One of my neighbors, I love her stories. Her grandparents had the first inside plumbing of any house on a particular street, and her parents were born here and she was born here. And she tells stories of sitting at 7th and Main, which is the corner that Mulligan's and the Kaleidoscope is on now. And the kids knew on a particular day which beer trucks were coming and delivering the beer. And they would go and sit and wait for the beer trucks to come in, because at that time they were still delivering the beer with the horses. And so they would sit and watch the horses go by, and the ice trucks would come in with the ice still being delivered, and they would get chips of ice and that sort of thing. And there are still people living in our neighborhood who can tell those stories. Well, we bought our home 30 years ago last month, and it was very different down here 30 years ago from what it is now. 30 years ago, the neighborhoods were absolutely filled with people, and there was no one in the entertainment district in the commercial area, because the shops were primarily closed. And the reason there were so many people in the neighborhood is that there were small apartments in most of these very large buildings. And the people living in those small apartments usually had very large families. And so it was very noisy in the neighborhood.
And as Sonia said, there was, other than a couple of the little bar and the big bar, which were the two main bars down in the area, and I think Chez Nora's was a bar, it wasn't Chez Nora's. It was mostly small shops or closed shops. It wasn't a destitute area, but it was an area that had a lot of problems, both property and people-wise.
In the 1970s, there was a great interest in historic preservation and history and heritage, and in Covington, there was an interest in preserving this old German neighborhood, this old German district of Covington, and so it became the main goal to preserve this, and it was then dubbed Mainstrasse German Village, which in English means Main Street German Village. And it has many themes around it that remind us of the German heritage. Some of the themes that were added in here were, for example, the Goose Girl Fountain, which is based on one of the folk tales of Grimm's fairy tales. And then the Glockenspiel, or the bell tower, was also added, which is a German theme and motif. And if you walk up and down the streets, you can just see how the homes were built in a very German style, close to the street. They have a lot of iron fencing around them. There are many German American churches right in the area, like the Mother of God Church. So there are many motifs already in place here, and so they just emphasized and elaborated on the basic German heritage of the area. It is very reminiscent of an old German neighborhood. My main area of research in writing and so on is German American history and heritage. And I'm recently retired from the University of Cincinnati, but I taught for many years at the university. And I did publish a book entitled Covington's German Heritage. I also published a book, the German Heritage Guide to the area. And most recently, I also have done one on the Roebling Suspension Bridge. I actually was involved early on in talking to people here, and so in the discussions I had with the planners at that time, the idea was to preserve and emphasize the German heritage and structures that were here. And I think a good point to recall too is across the river in Cincinnati, there's also an old German district, the Over the Rhine district, and that had fallen a lot into disrepair and modern urban decay. And I think the people on this side of the river thought that it was advisable to try to do something to preserve this district. I think it succeeded because the businessmen in the area too here were dedicated to joining in on the theme of the German heritage. A Mainstrasse Village Association was formed by the merchants here. They supported that and got together. And also I think the state of Kentucky really supported this effort here. And Governor Carroll, of course, gave funds for the Glockenspiel, for the bell tower, and it was really at the right time in the mid-70s to do something and build up the area of northern Kentucky, and it's especially the city of Covington.
But we had some pretty good people. Bernie Mormon was the mayor, and Tom Behan, who was on there, and Pete Bubenzer, who was a really good commissioner, older gentleman, and Tom Benton. We were a really good commission because Nick Clooney told me first 4 years of that commission were the best he's ever seen. You know, the way we were in budgetary constraints, but we had an ear open to the neighborhood, and we were real progressive. But we really worked to make sure things happen. Well, particularly Mainstrasse, I think Jerry Dieterich went around to some other places that had something similar, and he saw the potential in Mainstrasse for a German village. That's where it started. He went around, looked at other cities, see how they worked at. So that's how that all began over, particularly in Mainstrasse. Other things it was actually a necessity that some of our other things happened. When we were all elected in '79, Covington was on the most distressed cities list, one of the cities. We're a little bit cut above East St. Louis, but we actually but we got to do something. You know, we looked around. We looked at the riverfront. That wasn't developed. We had old buildings there, all kinds, and so we started looking at that. You know, that could be the place we could start the rebirth of Covington. And that was the commission as a whole. That was, and so we did that. We started that. It was a long process. It took us 10 years, which, to really get things moving there. But development takes time if you do it right. Fortunately, at the time, the government was offering urban development action grants, and the city was very successful in 2 of them. One was the condo project there at Riverside Drive. Yeah, that was the very first one. There was a duplex that was falling down there and all that. And then after that, developers say, hey, Covington got something done for a change. And so that's when we started getting these offers from all these developers. We'll come in, we'll build you a hotel and an office building. Yep. And we had several tries at that. They all failed. And then Bill Butler, who one time we had turned him down, and he gave through with a really good plan on what he wanted to do and take advantage of the UDAG grants. And it was very successful because it was so unique. It was the office hotel and our riverboats there. That was all part of one package. Yep. And the HUD liked that. And they always told us that was one of the most successful UDAG grants they ever gave out because of the public-private partnerships and the money that was leveraged in it. And that led to a lot of other things. I think it led to the Newport development, Dayton and Bellevue, because it was along the river and they saw the potential, developers. And Covington was building there, and Butler was the prime developer, so they went over to the other side. So, yeah, and Matt Tobin did the old 3rd District School, so he turned that into an office building over in Mainstrasse. That was another key development. People forget that. That was an abandoned school. Covington School District closed that. It was just an abandoned building. He came in there and made it an office building, which I thought was great. It was one of the first ones like that.
Well, I guess if you want to go back approximately 30 years or so, 30, 35 years ago, this area of Covington was not as nice as it is today. It had a lot of rundown houses, a lot of rundown properties, not very many businesses here at that time. The city worked with some of the businesses around here, but over the past, I'd say 15 to 20 years, this area has really developed into the entertainment area of Northern Kentucky. We have our festivals and events down here bring approximately 500,000 people a year. And through the efforts of the Mainstrasse Village Association, the residents, the city of Covington, we have done a lot of improvements throughout this area. The city of Covington, as you can look around and you see the park here that we're in, we have a Parks and Recreation department that works here every day, cleans this up and makes it nice and welcoming to not only the residents of Covington, to anybody who wants to come down here and visit. We pride ourselves on the fact that we have a safe environment in Covington. We have very minimal problems in this area, and it's a safe lot, a lot of well-lit parking lots, and we got a tree-lined island that brings an ambiance that nobody around here has. Well, I think probably the most important is when I look over my shoulder here, is the Glockenspiel bell tower that was dedicated 29 years ago to Julian Carroll when he was governor of the state of Kentucky. And we just recently got a grant from the Community Development Block Grant from the federal government to restore the bell tower. And every hour it comes out that plays the Pied Piper portrait, and the characters come out. Then it plays a couple of songs, and it's really a tourist attraction. We have tour buses from all over the United States come here, and they pull up here and they go watch the Pied Piper play. Then they go to many of our businesses throughout the area. Our Goose Girl Fountain, that was dedicated back in the 80s. A gentleman who lives in Cincinnati did this for his daughter, and he dedicated it to his daughter. It's one of its kind, and like I said, we've been very fortunate on both ends of our main street here, 6th and Main, 6th Street, to have 2 icons such as that through our city. We have so many signs that portray the people that dedicated, were popular, lived in this area, and they live throughout here. We want to honor them with a historic marker. Well, I think that what they say is they'd like to live here. Some of them can't afford it now because like I say, 30 years ago you could have bought the whole area for a couple $100,000. Now today it's very difficult to find a house down here less than $200,000, and in fact they're selling for $250,000 to $300,000 at least. and we got they're in demand and they're selling.
I think that initially when we bought down here, property was terribly, terribly inexpensive, but it didn't distract from the fact that these buildings are extremely well built. Most of them were built in the 1870s. Ours is a little earlier than that, but they're mostly brick constructions, and in most cases solid brick, and inside they're even even the walls inside are brick construction. So they're very, very substantial buildings. So a place to rehab, it was more cosmetic than it was anything else to come down here and fix things up. And of course in our building, we didn't really do anything externally at all except paint it. And I think that's one of the reasons it became a good place to come down and rehab things, because it was the architecture and the building structures themselves are so good that it wasn't as expensive as going out and having to rebuild a building at that time.
As for specific details as to how inexpensive these houses were, our house has 12 rooms in it. It has over 3,000 square feet, and in 1977 we paid $13,500 for it, which is slightly over $1,000 a room. I'm sure that anyone listening or watching this would be very happy to give us at least 10 times what we paid for it, but it's
Maybe
not
20.
for sale. We absolutely love it down here.
Well, it's fantastic. Everything sells down here just like that, because there is the urban people. They're not the urban pioneers. We're the urban pioneers. But the people that are moving back into Center City, which is happening across the river too, is becoming large in numbers. Their kids are gone, or they don't have any kids, and they work in town, so they areas like this are booming. I think the real estate market down here, even though it seems to be sagging a little bit nationally, is really good, and most of these places are worth 10 or 20 times what they were 20 years ago.
As for specifics, there are no houses for sale in our neighborhood right now, so I'm going to tell you about a house that's a little outside of Mainstrasse. So when I saw the real estate prospectus for us and saw the price being asked for it, I was just, oh my gosh, they got to be crazy. This is a 4-room house which is nearby here, and they had a price of $138,000 on it. As far as I'm concerned, I think that the plumbing has got to be golden everywhere in that house, and I don't think they're going to get that price, but it tells you what the market is like now as compared to what it was when we bought 30 years ago. People thought we were crazy. How could you possibly buy a house down there?
A lot of this property down here was either Section 8 or HUD rental property. And some of it still is. And of course, these are the buildings that people were buying to rehab. But that kind of changes the complexion of the population down here, because back in those days, there were a lot of people that were either in HUD or welfare homes, and that number has been greatly reduced because these people, these houses have become so much more valuable, and people are rehabbing them. There's still a lot of rental property down here, but it's not as much of the government Section 8 and HUD.
The area was in decline through the 70s, and a number of people thought we can get a jump started with creating a German village, which was a good concept. The bell tower was part of that, but it still didn't take off right away. It took a big effort, and I think Oktoberfest, Mayfest were drawing people here. So as that continued to go, crowds as many as 150,000 over 3 days, people investing saw the potential, and they started putting money into buying some of the buildings. And later on, we had some folks actually from Covington saw the potential, and they started investing in the buildings, opening up bars, restaurants.
When I first came, it needed a lot of work. The buildings a few of them had been restored, but a lot of them were still in very bad condition and needed a lot of tender, loving care. And so it took people like me who just said, I want to do this. And it isn't anything I've ever done before or since.
But when we moved out of the area, a lot of people tended to move out into the suburbs back in the, I guess, the 50s after the war. And I think the area became somewhat depressed compared to what it had been. And then over the years, you have different organizations that try to revitalize the area. My cousin, Mick Knoll, he was real instrumental in helping revive this particular area, Mainstrasse area. Matter of fact, the building that we're in now, he purchased it, I believe, with someone else, and I actually did the remodeling on this building. And I believe it was one of the first places to be remodeled or to be brought up to date, or at least that I know of. I thought he was taking a very big chance in doing this or making this big investment. And shortly after we got started, he already had renters for the residential part upstairs. They had the restaurant coming in down below, the gift shop that was in here. And then you start seeing other businesses move into the area. And I thought, wow, it's interesting that he had the forethought that this area could be revitalized. And it just kind of grew from there. One person saw that someone was successful, so another person would come into the area and try the same thing, and that's what I think rebuilt the area. And after that, I think it just gave it a little momentum. And once it got started, you had people moving back into the area for their private residence or for gift shops or other businesses.
I've been active in Mainstrasse since the early 70s. I used to work for Frisch's restaurant, and I was involved with festivals in Mainstrasse, and I saw how the neighborhood was coming together. So when the opportunity presented itself to take over this building, that's what I did in 1990.
When I got back involved in the late 70s, things were really kind of at rock bottom. The buildings were getting all run down. Most of the people rented. Most of the families that had been living here in Mainstrasse had moved out to the suburbs. The bakeries were closed. The bars were the only thing that stayed open, and the churches, one of them was taken for the expressway, St. Patrick's, the other one, St. Aloysius, had burned. And so things were in a general rundown condition. The buildings needed work. And fortunately, there were some people that had an idea how to maybe turn it around. Most of those people were affiliated with the Convention and Visitors Bureau. That was just coming into being. And I had just opened a business in a neighboring little, over by Mother of God Church, which is right across the railroad tracks from Mainstrasse. I had a building and a business over there, and so I kind of thought, well, this would be a good place to help Mainstrasse get off the ground and start up. So along with the other people and their involvement with the politicians and down in Frankfurt, we were able to get enough monies to build the bell tower and do some public improvements, a little bit of infrastructure, and people started coming in and making investments in the buildings and starting up businesses, and things started to change. Individuals would buy the buildings, rehab them, and either live in them or rent the residential part, the upper floors out, and have their business on the first floor. There was a lot of people that were involved that were dedicated to Covington and particularly to Mainstrasse that worked very hard in the early years to see that come about. I think a lot of them were people like myself who had roots here and had roots in other parts of Covington that just wanted to hated to see it in the condition it was, and thought it had some potential with the streetscape being the way it is. It's a nice, comfortable place. It's a great ambiance, to just relax and walk around. The architecture, unique. They've been able to preserve the older buildings and maintain them so they could be brought back to, their future glory or past glory. And I think those people just had a real drive to make things better in Covington.
When people come in here, they think that, well, there's a lot of money coming from the government, or the federal money, or this or that, and they have this idea that there's all these grants and all this help. And I have to remind them that all the buildings that have been restored, it's all private money. It's all people who have, they saw a vision, they saw something they wanted to do, and they did it. There isn't any money coming from Uncle Sam. So that's one thing that they all question about, because a lot of people live in cities where they have old areas and they are still run down, and they wonder, well, how come you did this and how come we can't do that at home? It takes someone to do it. There's not a magic wand that's going to come and there was a group of people 25 years, 30 years ago down here who saw that vision and worked on it and got the clock tower built, and it went from there.
Absolutely. I don't know of any grant money that went to anybody for a business, with, as you said, the exception of right along here. There was grant money for these sidewalks, and there was grant money for the bell tower, but everything else has been private development money. And that's really important when you're looking for a development area, because if the money you're putting up is your own, you're going to watch it a lot more carefully than if it's someone else's, and that's just human nature.
And when it comes to rehabbing houses, I don't know the exact numbers, but the urban pioneer type people that are coming down here are usually dual income people, man and wife, or man and partner, or wife and partner, or whatever. But they are beyond the low income grant money that you get for rehabbing one of these places. So most of these really nice places down here, I think the people have, are spending their own money to fix them up. I mean, more so than getting government grants. But the more financial involvement you have of the people that live there, whether it's the shops or the property owners, I think the better it's going to go. I mean, if it's a gift, if it's an outright gift, I don't think in the long run you end up with what we've ended up with down here. Like my wife said earlier, it's a question of people investing time, hardship, and money is what develops what we have down here.
Oh, I think it's turned around fabulously. It's a slow process, but weekly you see new people buying up buildings and rehabbing them, new people moving in either as owners or renters. And you also have a few businesses, that'll open up. So I think it's really worked out well for the area. I mean, I know that it's a lot safer, a lot cleaner, and the ambiance is getting the life back that it had in its early days.
That was about 20 years ago when we all of a sudden turned around and we said, hey, there's people working on these houses and living here and taking care of things besides us. And it started really about 20 years ago. We had the house for 10 years before we felt that this really was going to be what we wanted it to be. And 10 years ago, it really started to take off. Now there are people living here now who think, we're not going to, develop a whole lot more because it's complete. Well, in an area like this, it's never complete, because what you fixed 10 years ago has to be fixed again. And it is somewhat difficult finding the people who have the affection for these old buildings and who know how to work with the horsehair plaster and who know how to be innovative on solutions about where are we going to put the plumbing. So it's a labor of love, not only for those of us who have bought the houses and are rehabbing them, but for the people actually doing the work in them. Now, Bob and I never did any of our own work other than choose the paint colors, but we found a really great group of craftsmen. Now, of course, it was easier 20 or 30 years ago to find them than it is now, because many of them were of the older generation, and oftentimes they're not passing the skills on down. But still, it's a labor of love to work on these buildings.
Another thing, just adding on to that, this is a designated historical district. So thereby there are requirements, certificates of authenticity that you appropriateness, excuse me, that you have to meet on paint colors, any additions to the structure visible from the street have to be approved by the city.
Well, I think that goes to the fact that we're in a historic district, and the city has, with their code enforcement and with their zoning and their building permits, they're not allowing people to just destroy their heritage. You have to keep that. If it's a historic area, they got guidelines that they have to follow before they can do any painting or replacement of windows or colors or any remodeling at all. You have to go through the city, and they are very sensitive to the German heritage that we have down here.
I think a landmark like this building, what it does for the Mainstrasse area is I think it helps the progression of restoration and improvement throughout the community. Since we have purchased this building and renovated it, there have been other buildings right down the block from us that have been purchased. There's other businesses who've come across the river from Cincinnati and have renovated similar buildings. And I think it also provides a regeneration of not only spirit but just growth in general to the community at large. I feel like I have been an ambassador for the city of Covington because this has been a wonderful place to work. It's nice to go outside and sit on the benches amongst the tree-lined street, and it's a safe area, and just being a part of a community has been wonderful.
One of the things that I think this area has going for it is the really great people who live down here. As far as I'm concerned, I've got the greatest bunch of neighbors in the world. Now, we have lived in a number of different cities in various states, and it's very much, generally speaking, a live and let live neighborhood down here, and we have people from all walks of life, except we don't have a lot of children down here. This is primarily an adult community.
This is a very high-level entertainment district now. We have excellent jazz music, live music all the time, and a lot of people, are coming over here from across the river, naturally. We enjoy it. We enjoy the nightlife. Now, I think there's probably some malcontents who don't like the noise, but there again, why would they come down here? Why would they buy down here if they weren't, if this wasn't there? This is an entertainment district. That's what it's designated as, and that's what it's been practically 20 years now, maybe more than 20 years.
I think one of the things I find so interesting is the really good food served in the pubs. Now, that certainly was not true 30 years ago. As Bob says, they were mostly bars then and not serving food. But about 20 years ago, a man named Lyle Yost bought the Strasse house, and it had a real kitchen in it, and he started using the real kitchen. And 25 years ago, the cost of his blue plate special was $2.50 for, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans cooked right, which is the southern way of cooking the green beans. There's pork fat involved in that. But it was just amazing to get this really great food in this neighborhood bar. And Lyle has since sold the business to someone else, but there's still really great food in that particular family bar, neighborhood bar. And many of the places you would not think of as serving really great food do serve really great food. Now, it's not fancy food, it's, good old American cooking, roast beef, mashed potatoes, and carrots on Sunday sort of thing. So, but it's just part of the lifestyle down here, and it's been part of the lifestyle for quite a while. So you needn't be surprised that there are bars and restaurants down here when you come down here.
And being a a retired married couple, of course, we eat out 5 days a week, maybe 6. So we're experts on the bars and the restaurants, and they're all friendly. You know, and they're all civic-minded people. You know, so that helps too. Everybody participates down here. It's a lot of fun when you get people who are really into things, and like we are with the events and the festivals, and it's a lot of fun. You know, you can, of course, we're both retired and we have more time to do it, but you can pretty much devote a lifetime to something like an Oktoberfest or a Mayfest or even a Mardi Gras. You know, there's a lot of work, but it's almost everything down here is almost 100% volunteer, so far as the community is concerned.
We've been here for 23 years. We opened in March of 1984. My dad was a musician that played all around Cincinnati ever since he was a very young man. Started playing drums when he was about 12. And played in various bands, played with James Brown, played with Sergio Mendes in Brazil 66. He was, he did a lot. He was a great musician, played with all the great players in Cincinnati. Jimmy McGarry, Kenny Poole, Mary Ellen Tanner, Frank Vincent. I mean, you name them, he played with them. And I think he got tired of moving his drums and setting them up all over and seeing everybody else making money off of his musicianship, so he decided to open up his own restaurant. He had a Dixieland band at the time. The Captain's Anchorage was kind of starting to do a little New Orleans flavored food, little blackened things here and there, and the two just kind of gelled together. He found this location and loved it, and I had been in the restaurant and bar business, and I guess he decided he could trust me and give me a job. So he and I opened it together, and here we are. You know, I'm not sure exactly what drew him to the spot. I know he saw the building and the inside and loved it. It's an old drugstore. I think it's like 1865 is when the building was built, and it was Peake's Pharmacy and Schilling's Pharmacy. I've had quite a few older people from Covington, you know, remember sitting at the little ice cream soda bar in there. He loved the terrazzo floor and the tin ceiling, and he was stationed in New Orleans when he was in the Navy, and just loved the whole feel of New Orleans. And in a lot of New Orleans bars, they'll put a stage anywhere. So he put the stage behind the bar, and it was supposed to be a little lunch kind of place with music at night and cocktails, and it turned out to be something much different, and we've been doing basically the same thing for a long time. You know, just other people opening businesses around here in the village. That was when I knew it was going to be a good thing, especially Chez Nora. When they opened across the street from us, Nora Dempsey was the original owner, and now it's Jimmy and Patty Galise. But Nora, great gal, owned liquor stores, had a great little following, and so I think she had a lot of people coming to visit her place, which started bringing more people over here. The Strasse House, great little place. He had a nice little patio, teeny patio at the time. Now it's much bigger, and they do a lot more business. But I think those little places just started getting more people over here, and bar and restaurant owners saying, hey, you know, this looks like a good little neighborhood. Plus, I think the property might have been a little cheap at that time. Not as cheap anymore. The guy that sold us the building that we're in bought it in the 70s for $75,000. And I can tell you that we paid quite a lot more for that building than $75,000.
Well, I've been involved with Mainstrasse for a long time. Through organizations, volunteer groups, the city of Covington, I've been involved for over 25 years. So it's, you know, I used to come down as a volunteer group and help sell beer at the festivals down here. And then after I got on the city commission, This is one of our best areas of the city as far as entertainment, and we try to promote that and work with the association. And I've been the executive director for over 4.5 years now. Like I say, you feel like this is such a great place in our city. And as a city commissioner, if I can do anything to improve this area of the city, or if I can do anything to improve East Side or Licking Riverside or Latonia Southgate, all out the city, I feel very good about that. So the fact that I have an opportunity to work with the association that wants to improve the city and wants to do more positive things to help the city improve its image and develop great projects, I want to be part of that.
Unaware that they were being threatened, they followed through the Mainstrasse, the street where no music